Last summer, I had an unsettling experience. It was a Saturday, and my friends and I kept up our yearly tradition of going to the state fair. Because it was the weekend, I had to park far from the fairgrounds. The streets were packed, and all the parking lots were full. After driving around for a while, I finally found a spot on a hill. One side of the street was bordered by woods that sloped upward toward train tracks, and the other side had an apartment complex. It was about a 20 to 25-minute walk to the fairgrounds, but I didn't mind. It was free, and I liked the walk. After spending the day at the fair, I began the long walk back to my car. When I reached the hill, I noticed a woman standing by the side of the road near the apartment building. She seemed to be looking directly at me. She looked to be in her 40s, with a concerned expression on her face, but she seemed relieved when she saw me getting closer. I wondered what she might want. Maybe she locked herself out of her apartment or needed help with something. As I got closer, she approached me and asked if I could help her with her car. I asked her what was wrong, and she said her car was acting strange. She pointed to her car, which was parked near the woods, and explained that after turning the engine off, the interior of the car was unusually hot, and she couldn't figure out why. This raised some alarms in my head. It didn't sound like a real issue, and I started to feel uneasy. I glanced at the car. Its windows were tinted so dark that I couldn't see inside. I politely told her I didn't know much about cars and suggested she call a mechanic. But she didn't let it go. She spoke more insistently, asking me to just take a quick look. She even grabbed my arm lightly, trying to pull me toward the car. Against my better judgment, I took a few steps toward the car. But the closer I got, the more my gut screamed at me to stop. At the last moment, I backed away, apologizing and telling her I needed to leave. Before I could finish speaking, the back door of the car swung open, and two men jumped out, rushing toward me. Without a second thought, I turned and sprinted for my car. I could hear their footsteps pounding the ground behind me as I ran. My heart was racing, but I knew I had to keep going. I was in good shape, and thankfully I was pulling away from them. As I got closer to my car, I frantically hit the unlock button. The moment I reached it, I dove inside, slammed the door, and sped off. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I barely saw the men standing at the edge of the street watching me. I called the police immediately after, but I never heard anything more about it. I still wonder what could have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts that day. Another incident happened when I was 12. My parents were out of town for the weekend, leaving my 17-year-old sister in charge. I was excited. It meant staying up late playing video games and eating junk food. That Friday night, around 7 p.m., my sister told me she was going to a friend's house and asked if I'd be okay staying home alone. I didn't mind, so she left, and I shut myself in my room to play Madden on my PlayStation. About 30 minutes later, I got hungry and went downstairs to make a frozen pizza. On the way to the kitchen, I noticed the front door was unlocked. My sister must have forgotten to lock it, so I locked it without thinking much of it and went back to my game after making the pizza. Hours later, I heard the front door open and close. I figured my sister was back, but after waiting a few minutes, she didn't come upstairs. I didn't hear any movement downstairs at all. Curious, I went downstairs to check, but the door was unlocked and my sister was nowhere to be found. I stepped outside to see if she was around, but just then I saw her car pulling into the driveway. My stomach dropped. That hadn't been my sister coming in earlier. When she got out of the car, I told her what had happened, and she freaked out. She confirmed that she'd forgotten to lock the door when she left. We called the police, and they came to search the house, but no one was found. My parents returned the next morning, and nothing like that has ever happened again. But it still chills me to think someone had been inside the house as I was cooking my pizza, hiding nearby. Lastly, one day I was jogging on a path in the woods near my house. I'm an early riser and like to work out before dawn, so it was around 5 a.m. and still dark. About 15 minutes into my jog, I heard footsteps behind me. At first, I ignored it, but eventually, I glanced over my shoulder and saw a man jogging about 10 feet behind me. He was older, maybe in his 40s or 50s, and looked disheveled. He wasn't dressed for running, which made me uneasy. I picked up my pace, but he stayed the same distance behind me. When I slowed down, he did too. I kept running, focusing on the path ahead. When I finally reached the end of the woods, I looked back again, but the man was gone. I was confused, but I shrugged it off and went home. A few days later, I returned to the same path. This time, about 5 minutes in, something flew past my head. I stopped and turned, only to feel a sharp pain in my shoulder. Someone had hit me with a rock. Another rock came flying toward my head, and I barely dodged it. Panicked, I sprinted toward the edge of the woods, hearing rocks being thrown behind me. I've never been back to that trail since. I can only guess it was the same man from before, but I have no idea what his intentions were. All I know is that I won't be jogging in those woods again.